a quiet restaurant, a blind date arranged by someone else, and a millionaire father who told his autistic son to stay silent, afraid that another woman might walk away if she saw the truth. But when Sarah Hagen sat down, she didn't flinch. She didn't look past the boy. She looked at him. What she said next wasn't extraordinary, but it was the first time in months the boy lifted his head and smiled. She didn't know who they were. She didn't know she had just passed a test that wasn't meant for her. And she definitely didn't know that this one evening would change all three of their lives. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The restaurant wasn't fancy. Not by Ian Bailey's standards. No valet, no string quartet. Just dim lighting, soft jazz from hidden speakers, and a quiet booth in the back, far from curious glances. That's why he chose it. He didn't want impressions. He wanted control. He checked his watch. The date was scheduled for 7 o'clock. It was already 7:03. Across the table sat his son Credence, 8 years old, small for his age, with sandy brown hair, noise-canceling headphones, and a quiet intensity in his eyes. The boy tapped his fingers against the edge of the table in rhythmic threes. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 pause. Remember what we talked about? Ian said softly, leaning in. Credence didn't look at him, but nodded once, just barely. No shouting, no standing up, and no random facts. Okay? Tap, tap, tap. I'm not ashamed of you, Ian added, but some people don't get it. So let's just keep it simple tonight. Tap, tap. No third one. Just stillness. Ian sighed and sat back. He hadn't wanted to bring Credence, but his sister, who usually watched him, was stuck in traffic. Canceling the date last minute would have raised questions. He hated questions. The blind date was his sister's idea anyway, a last-ditch effort to pull him out of what she called emotional exile. He'd agreed, mostly to stop her from emailing him candidate profiles with subject lines like, warm smile, loves dogs. At 7:06, the door opened. She walked in with the kind of presence that didn't announce itself. No red lipstick, no heels that clicked. Just a soft blue coat, a simple braid over one shoulder, and a pair of eyes that immediately scanned the room with quiet nerves. Ian sat up straighter. That had to be her. She looked like she didn't belong in this kind of place. Not in a bad way. Just as if someone had handed her the address and said, "Go, trust me." The hostess gestured toward his booth. Sarah hesitated for a split second, her gaze landing first on Ian, then on the boy sitting beside him, then back again. Ian held his breath. This was the moment, the one that always came, the one that made him tense up every time he introduced someone to his world. And then she smiled, not politely, not nervously, just gently. "Hi," she said as she slid into the booth across from them. "Sorry I'm late. Bus got rerouted." "No problem," Ian said. "I'm Ian. And this is—" He glanced at Credence. The boy stared at the salt shaker. "My son." Sarah looked at Credence and, without hesitation, said, "Hi there." She didn't wave, didn't speak loudly or lean forward like people always did when they tried too hard. Just two simple words, soft, clear, and aimed directly at him. Credence didn't respond, but his tapping resumed. Tap, tap, tap. I noticed, and so did Sarah. "I used to do that when I was little," she said, glancing at the pattern. "In fives, though. I was a weirdo about it." Silence. Then, for the first time since they arrived, Credence lifted his eyes briefly and looked at her. Ian froze. The waitress came over. Sarah ordered tea. Ian asked for coffee. Credence stayed silent, as usual, but Sarah leaned toward the waitress and said, "Can he get ginger ale, if that's okay?" Ian blinked. She didn't ask him. She asked like she already understood the rhythm. When the waitress left, Sarah turned to Ian. "So, what do you do when you're not on awkward dates arranged by well-meaning relatives?" He chuckled, an actual laugh. "Not forced. I work in construction management. Large scale." She raised an eyebrow. "Like malls? Like airports?" "Whoa, that's big." "It's boring," he said. "But stable." Sarah nodded. "Stable's underrated." The conversation moved slowly but steadily. She didn't ask invasive questions. She didn't fish for income hints or flex her resume. She talked about her part-time work at a rehab center, about how much she loved books but hated e-readers, about how she once got locked in a walk-in freezer because she was trying to sneak cookies at her old cafe job. And through it all, Credence didn't retreat. He didn't speak, but he didn't shut down either. He watched her. That was new. Halfway through dinner, while Ian went to the restroom, Sarah sat alone with Credence. Tap, tap, tap. Then stillness. Sarah waited a moment, then said softly, "The salt shaker's a little off-center." Credence reached out and adjusted it. "Precisely," then nodded almost imperceptibly. "I get that," she added. "I don't like when the ketchup label faces the wrong way. Drives me nuts." Stillness again. Then, and only then, a whisper so faint it might have been imagined, "Me too." Ian returned to the table just in time to miss it. But what he didn't miss was the way his son sat. Not hunched, not curled in, just relaxed. For the first time in months, they finished their meal. Sarah didn't rush. She didn't linger either. When the bill came, Ian reached for it, but the server handed it directly to him, along with a white linen napkin bearing the logo of his company, subtly embroidered in the corner. Sarah's gaze dropped to it, only for a second. Then her smile faltered, just slightly. She stood up. "It was really nice meeting you both." Ian frowned. "You're leaving?" She nodded, grabbing her coat. "Early shift tomorrow." "I didn't expect any of this." Credence turned his head toward her. Sarah hesitated. Then softly, "Thanks for letting me sit with you." She left before Ian could say anything else. And as the door closed behind her, Ian realized she wasn't like anyone else he'd ever met, and she didn't even know who he was. Maybe that's why it mattered. The ride home was quiet. Ian sat behind the wheel, one hand resting on the gear shift, the other occasionally adjusting the heater. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Credence sat in the back seat, headphones on, staring out the window. The boy wasn't tapping. He wasn't drawing in the condensation. He wasn't doing anything. That unsettled Ian more than he cared to admit. "Did you like her?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. Silence. Then, "She talked normal." Ian blinked. "Yeah, she did." That was it. No follow-up. No smile. But the fact that Credence had offered a full sentence, unsolicited, was enough to make Ian's chest tighten. He parked in the garage and helped his son out of the car. As they stepped into the house, the silence between them wasn't heavy like usual. It was softer, calmer, like a song you don't mind leaving on repeat in the background. That night, after Credence went to bed, Ian stood in the kitchen nursing a lukewarm cup of tea he didn't even like. His phone buzzed with a message from his sister. So? Tell me everything. Is she a gold digger or does she have a soul? He stared at the screen, then typed. She talked to Credence. Not me. Him. A pause. Then, and? He didn't respond. He wasn't ready to put words on it yet. The night had shifted something, and he didn't want to name it too fast. That would cheapen it. The next morning, he returned to work. Bailey Structures was a cold beast of glass and steel, like most of the things it built. From the moment Ian walked in, people cleared hallways, meetings began on time, and no one asked personal questions. That's how he liked it. But today he couldn't concentrate. His assistant, Marta, noticed. "You've had that same page open for 30 minutes, she said, nodding toward his screen. Ian blinked. He hadn't realized. Do you need coffee? Or a name? He looked up. A name. Marta grinned slightly. You had a date last night, didn't you? Ian gave a tight smile. How do you know that? You wore a dark blue tie. You only wear that tie when your sister's interfering in your life. Caught. He leaned back. I don't know her last name. Marta raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I never asked. She never offered. Marta leaned on the doorframe. So what's the plan? I wasn't planning one. But now. He hesitated. I want to thank her. Marta didn't comment. She just nodded and left the office, leaving him with his unread spreadsheet and a quiet ache behind his ribs. At lunchtime, he returned to the restaurant, under the pretense of a meeting with a vendor. The same waitress was working. Hey, Ian said, his voice casual. The woman I was with yesterday. Do you know if she works here? The waitress blinked. Sarah? Sarah, he repeated. The name tasted familiar now. Warm. She's part-time. Works weekends mostly. I think she mentioned something about a second job. Some center a few blocks away. A center? The waitress thought for a second. With kids, maybe? I always forget the name. She brings books and snacks when she comes in. Quiet type. That tracked. Ian left a generous tip and walked the block radius himself. He wasn't trying to stalk her. He just wanted to see where she belonged. On the corner of Elm and 10th, he found it. A squat building with a mural of handprints and cartoon suns. The door was glass, smudged from dozens of tiny fingers. Inside, through the window, he saw Sarah crouched beside a child in a wheelchair, holding up picture cards. She was smiling, not the polite kind, the real kind, the kind that lived in the eyes more than the mouth. Ian didn't go in. He stood there for a moment, then turned and walked back to the office, his mind louder than the traffic. That night, he sat beside Credence during dinner. They ate in silence, like always, but when Ian got up to take his plate, Credence spoke. Can we see her again? Ian turned. Credence looked down at his plate. She was warm, the boy added. Ian swallowed. Yeah, he said softly. She was. The next day, Sarah had just finished wiping down the art table when one of her coworkers poked her head in. There's a guy at the front desk asking for you. Sarah frowned. What kind of guy? Tall, stiff, expensive shoes. Says his name is Ian. Her stomach dropped. She wiped her hands on a towel and made her way to the lobby. And there he was, looking oddly out of place among the crayon drawings and snack wrappers. Hi, she said cautiously. Hi. He held up a small paper bag. I brought muffins. She blinked. You tracked me down with muffins? He nodded. Seemed safer than flowers. Sarah stared at him. Is this some sort of apology? He shrugged. Maybe. Or just a second try? A second try at what? At talking, without logos or expectations. She didn't answer right away. The front desk worker had vanished, clearly sensing this wasn't a conversation for eavesdropping. Finally, Sarah took the bag. If they're blueberry, I'm walking out. Half blueberry, half chocolate chip. She stared at him. Smart man. A silence settled. Then Ian said, quietly, I think Credence liked you. Sarah's voice was soft. I liked him too. Another pause. Can we try again? He asked. Just the three of us. No pressure. Sarah considered it, and then, to her own surprise, nodded. All right, but this time, she said, we're meeting somewhere with French fries. They met at a tiny diner 3 blocks from the rehab center. Nothing fancy. Booths with red vinyl cushions. A chalkboard menu with half the letters rubbed off. A corner jukebox that hadn't worked in years. But it was warm, and it smelled like buttered toast and possibility. Credence was the first to slide into the booth, still wearing his headphones. Sarah took the seat across from him without hesitation, placing her bag beside her and smiling like this was the most natural thing in the world. Ian followed, more hesitant, as if unsure of the rules this time. So, Sarah said, glancing at the menu. Important question, waffles or fries? Credence looked up, expression neutral. Both, he said quietly. Sarah grinned. Excellent choice. Ian nearly dropped his water. It wasn't just that Credence had spoken, it was that he'd spoken first. Sarah didn't react with surprise. She simply nodded, as if it was the most reasonable thing to say. They ordered waffles, fries, ginger ale, coffee for Ian, tea for Sarah. The conversation wasn't fast, but it wasn't forced either. Credence didn't talk much, but he didn't shut down. He listened, occasionally nodded. Once, he even corrected Ian when he said the moon was 384,000 kilometers from Earth. It's 384,400, Credence murmured. Sarah lifted her cup in mock salute. Science for the win. Ian smiled, a little lost in the moment. He hadn't realized how light this could feel, like he didn't have to constantly plan or apologize or smooth over rough edges. Sarah didn't flinch when Credence used his fingers to line up the sugar packets. She didn't stare when he paused mid-sentence or repeated a word twice. She just was. That night, Ian found himself outside her building. He wasn't sure why. He hadn't planned to walk her home. But after they left the diner, Credence had slipped his hand into Sarah's, brief, fleeting, uncertain, and she'd accepted it like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Now, with Credence home and the silence of his apartment pressing in, Ian stood under the flickering streetlight near her doorway, debating whether to knock. He didn't, but the next morning she texted, "Thanks for yesterday. It was good." He stared at the message for a long time, then replied, "It was more than good." They didn't label what was happening. There were no confessions, no declarations. Just a slow shift, dinners, park walks, conversations held in safe corners of time. Credence didn't ask where Sarah had come from. He simply began to expect her. Not demand, not cling, just wait. And Sarah never made promises, but she always showed up. The first time she came to their apartment, she brought cookies, still warm, wrapped in a cloth napkin. She didn't compliment the furniture or ask about the square footage. She sat cross-legged on the floor and helped Credence build a domino tower that stood for 6 glorious seconds before collapsing in chaos. He laughed, a full, belly laugh, Ian had never heard that sound before. Later, while washing dishes, he looked over at her. Sleeves rolled up, hair in a loose bun, a smear of flour on her cheek, and felt something crack open inside him. Not attraction. Recognition. This is what it could be. The shift didn't go unnoticed. At work, Marta knocked lightly before stepping into his office one morning. "You're different," she said. Ian looked up from his laptop. "What do you mean?" "Your tie's crooked. You're humming." "I'm not humming." She smirked. "You're wearing navy with charcoal. You're definitely distracted." He smiled faintly. "I've been seeing someone." Marta raised her eyebrows. "Serious?" Ian hesitated, then said, "It could be." That same afternoon, he stopped by the rehab center unannounced. Sarah was there, crouched beside a boy in a wheelchair, her hands gently guiding his as he stacked blocks. Ian waited until she noticed him, then waved her over. She stepped outside into the crisp air, arms crossed to fight the chill. "Everything okay?" she asked. He nodded. "I just wanted to see you." She smiled. "Well, here I am." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. "Don't panic," he said quickly. "It's not jewelry." She gave him a look. That's exactly what someone about to hand over jewelry would say. He opened the lid. Inside was a simple keychain, a tiny metal sailboat with C engraved on one side. "For credence," he said. She looked up at him. "You remembered," she said softly. Ian nodded. "You said he liked boats. Said he watches the sails move like they're breathing." Sarah didn't speak for a moment. Then, "He does." She took the keychain. "Thank you." The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy with meaning that neither of them tried to name. A week later, everything changed. Ian thought it would be a regular day. Work, emails, pick up Credence from school. But just after 3 p.m., he got a call from the school secretary. "Mr. Bailey? Credence didn't get on the bus today." "What do you mean?" "We've looked around. No one's seen him since he left class." His heart seized. 15 minutes later, Ian was on foot, his car abandoned on the corner of 7th and Pine. He checked every block between the school and their home. And then he saw them. Credence was standing on the edge of the sidewalk, clutching a small backpack that didn't belong to him. And beside him, calm as ever, was Sarah. She was kneeling down, one hand gently on his shoulder, the other pointing to a building across the street. Ian ran up, breathless. "What happened?" Sarah stood, her voice steady. "He saw a younger boy forget this bag at the bus stop. Tried to follow him. Got lost." Ian looked at his son, then back at her. "And you?" "I was walking home. I saw him near the bakery. He looked unsure, so I stayed with him." Credence didn't look up, but he whispered. She waited. And there, on that city corner, honking horns, rushing strangers, a breeze turning cold, Ian realized she wasn't just someone kind. She was someone who stays. Ian didn't say much as they walked. He held Credence's hand tighter than usual, but not in panic, in gratitude. The boy walked quietly, still clutching the other child's backpack, as if completing the mission mattered more than anything else in the world. Sarah walked beside them, not in the middle, not ahead, just close enough to be present. And Ian kept glancing at her, not out of obligation, but from something quieter, something weightier. They dropped the forgotten backpack off at the school office. No big scene, no questions, Just a quiet nod from the secretary and a grateful smile. Then the three of them stepped back into the afternoon sun. Would you? Ian began, then stopped. Sarah turned. He rubbed a hand against the back of his neck. Would you like to come over? She hesitated. It's not an invitation, he added quickly. I mean, it is, but not like that. Just stay for tea. Or cocoa. Or to finish the conversation I didn't know we were having. Sarah gave him a look, measured, then glanced at Credence, who was still watching her from beneath his lashes. All right, she said quietly. I could use cocoa. At the apartment, Ian moved around the kitchen while Sarah sat at the counter with Credence. The boy had taken off his headphones, something he rarely did indoors, and was now lining up marshmallows by size. Sarah leaned in slightly, watching. Are you sorting them by fluffiness? She asked. Credence shook his head. Diameter. Very scientific of you. They melt better if you do it right. She smiled. I never thought about that. They make soft swirls in the cocoa if you time it. Ian paused by the stove, holding the kettle, and stared. His son was talking. Freely. Softly but without effort. It wasn't about the volume. It was the trust. He didn't say anything. He just poured the hot water, added the cocoa mix, and brought 2 mugs over. One with slightly frothed milk for her. One with no foam for Credence. You remember how I take it? She asked. He shrugged. You once winced when you got foam. I made a note. She took a sip. Maybe you are secretly thoughtful. I don't advertise it, he said. For a while they drank in silence. Not the heavy kind, the comfortable kind. When Credence retreated to his usual corner with a book, Sarah finally asked the question that had been hanging between them for days. Why did you bring him to the date? Ian didn't flinch. Because I've been through this before, he said. I've gone on polite dates where the woman smiled at me and avoided him, or asked me when I'd last had me time, or worse, pitted him. He looked at her. I didn't want someone who would tolerate him. I wanted someone who would see him. Sarah nodded slowly. And you didn't think to warn me? No, he said honestly, because I wasn't sure if I was even going to stay at the table myself. She smiled at that, a real, amused, crooked smile that reached her eyes. And now I don't want you to leave. It was said simply, not as a plea, just a truth. She didn't reply, but she didn't stand up either. Later, after she left, after Credence had fallen asleep and the apartment fell quiet again, Ian sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the keychain she'd left on the counter. The sailboat. She hadn't taken it with her. At first, he thought it meant something was wrong. But then he realized she hadn't taken it because it wasn't hers. It was meant for Credence. And she'd left it behind for him to find it on his own. Like everything she did, quiet, respectful, patient. The next day, Ian brought it to his son. Credence looked at it, ran his fingers over the engraving, then said, I want to show her the kite. Ian blinked. The one you drew? Credence nodded. The boat kite. I think she'd like that. She likes real things, Credence said, like it was a fact. Ian smiled. That weekend they met again at a park. Sarah brought sandwiches. Ian brought a picnic blanket. Credence brought the kite. It was homemade, patched together from 2 broken ones and some old fabric. It looked like a boat with wings, strange, unbalanced, and completely his. They flew it together, Sarah holding the string with him when the wind grew strong. And at one point, Ian caught himself staring at the scene in front of him. Sarah kneeling behind his son, her arms steadying his, both of them laughing as the boat kite dipped and soared like it had a mind of its own. He stood there for a long time before she turned and said, "You okay?" "Yeah," he said. "I'm just watching." "That's allowed," she said, brushing wind-blown hair from her face. "As long as you don't start giving performance notes." "No notes," he said. "Just gratitude." She held his gaze, and for the first time he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. She didn't freeze. She just let it happen. Later that evening, Sarah sat on her small couch at home, holding a mug with cold tea and wondering what exactly this thing between them was. Not a romance. Not yet. But more than just casual dinners and cocoa. Something was growing. Quietly. And when her phone buzzed with a photo, Credence holding the boat kite with a victorious grin, she smiled. Under it, Ian had typed, "He says it stayed up longer today. He wanted you to know." She texted back, "Tell him I believe him, and tell him next time, I'm bringing a dragon kite." Started small. A missed call. Then 2. Then 3. Ian wasn't the type to panic easily, but when Sarah didn't respond to his messages for 2 days, something inside him shifted from puzzled to deeply unsettled. He knew she wasn't the type to play games. She was honest, direct, always had been. And maybe that's why the silence felt sharper, colder. He tried not to spiral. People got busy. Phones died. Schedules collided. But deep down, the old fear stirred. The fear that all of this had been too fragile to last. That someone as real as Sarah couldn't possibly want to stay tethered to a man with too much baggage and a child the world rarely understood. By the third evening, Credence noticed. "Where's Sarah?" he asked, carefully stacking napkins beside his plate. Ian cleared his throat. "She might just be busy." The boy didn't look convinced. "She always texts," he said simply. "Even if she's tired." That part struck Ian harder than expected. He stood from the table and walked to the living room, pretending to look for the remote. But his hands just hovered over the shelf, unmoving. What if she had walked away? What if he'd misread everything? What if he'd let his guard down and let her into Credence's world? Only to find out he was still just a temporary stop on her journey. The next morning, Sarah finally responded. A short message. "Sorry I disappeared. Can I see you tonight? Just you." No explanation. No smiley face. No warmth. Just distance. He typed back, "Yes. 7?" She replied, "I'll come to you." 7:02, Sarah knocked. Ian opened the door to find her standing in a gray hoodie, her hair damp from the drizzle outside. No makeup, no practiced smile. She looked exhausted, but something else too. He stepped aside wordlessly, and she walked in. The apartment was quiet. Credence was at his aunt's for the evening. The couch looked too formal, so they sat at the kitchen table instead, like it was easier to talk where life usually happened, over meals, messes, and morning coffee. "I'm sorry," she said softly, fingers curling around the edge of her teacup. "You don't have to be," Ian replied, though part of him still braced for impact. "I do," she insisted. "I should have explained. I just needed a minute." He waited. "I saw someone," she said finally. "From before." "Before what?" "Before you. Before all this." She didn't mean another man. Ian could tell by the weight in her voice. This wasn't about jealousy or competition. "This woman I used to work for," she continued. "A mother. Her son was nonverbal like Credence used to be. She hired me to help and fired me when I told her that the issue wasn't with the boy, but with how she was speaking to him. Ian stayed silent, letting her fill the space. She said I was just a babysitter, that I didn't know what I was talking about, that I was naive to think anyone would ever love a child like that, let alone want to stay. Her hands trembled slightly. She gripped the cup tighter. And when I saw her again in a grocery store of all places, it all came back. The doubt, the weight, the voice in my head that says this, you, Credence, this little thing we're building, it's not mine to hold. Ian leaned forward, his voice steady. But it is yours to hold. You've been holding it since the night you sat at that table. Sarah blinked hard. What if I drop it? Then I'll help you catch it. She stared at him, really stared, then let out a breath like she'd been holding it for years. I was scared, she admitted. I've been scared for years, Ian replied. You're allowed 1 week. They sat in silence for a moment longer. Then Sarah stood. I should go. I just wanted to explain. Ian followed her to the door. You can come back whenever you want, he said quietly. No need to ask. She didn't answer, just gave him a long look, full of meaning he couldn't quite decode, and stepped into the hall. The next evening, Ian came home to find Credence sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a blank piece of paper. What's up, buddy? The boy didn't answer at first. Then, is she coming back? Ian crouched beside him. She needed space, but she explained. She'll come back when she's ready. Credence stared at the paper. She told me once, he said quietly, that silence can be full, not empty. Ian smiled. She's good with words. The boy nodded, then began drawing something slow, deliberate. A boat, with a small figure inside, sailing toward the sun. 2 days later, she returned. She didn't text, didn't call. She simply knocked, and when Ian opened the door, she was there with a bag of groceries and the same quiet, steady eyes. I brought noodles, she said, and your son said something about learning how to make garlic bread from scratch. Ian stepped aside. You can stay for more than dinner, he said softly. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. That night, while Credence read on the couch, Ian and Sarah stood side by side at the sink, hands wet, dishes stacked between them. I don't know where this is going, she said quietly. I don't either, he replied, but I like where we are. Me too. She looked at him then, eyes soft, open. Do you still want me to stay? He didn't answer. He just leaned in and kissed her. Slow, quiet, and certain. And that night, there were no declarations. Just her head on his shoulder, the soft hum of the dishwasher, and a boy asleep in the next room, safe, warm, and still smiling in his sleep. The next few weeks passed in slow, golden increments. There were no declarations, no dramatic twists, just mornings that began with shared glances over tea, afternoons spent making messes in the kitchen, and evenings where 3 people who used to live in different worlds learned how to share one. Sarah became part of the rhythm. She didn't move in, not officially, but she was there. Her scarf on the coat hook, her handwriting on the grocery list, her laughter echoing down the hallway when Credence made another joke about how Ian's pancakes always turned out aggressively oval. Ian watched it all unfold quietly. He wasn't used to this kind of happiness, not the showy kind, but the present kind. The kind that settles into your bones like warmth after cold. The kind you don't question because it asks nothing of you except to be honest. Credence, meanwhile, began talking more. Not a flood, just steady drops. He still wore his headphones in crowded places. Still lined things up in threes. still hated sudden noises and polyester tags. But he spoke. To Sarah, to Ian, to himself sometimes, while narrating how long it would take toast to become structurally inappropriate. And one evening, entirely unprompted, he walked into the kitchen and said, "I don't mind her here." Ian turned. "You don't." Credence shook his head. "She makes the room softer." That night, Ian told Sarah those words, and she turned away to hide her expression. But he caught the tremble in her smile anyway. The next Saturday, they had a small movie night at the apartment. Popcorn, blankets, a pillow fort Credence insisted on building even though it kept collapsing every 5 minutes. Sarah was wearing one of Ian's hoodies, oversized, sleeves too long, and Credence had claimed her lap as the safest place to hide during loud scenes. At some point during the second movie, Ian looked over at her. She was mid-laugh, her hand absently resting on Credence's shoulder, and he realized he wasn't afraid anymore. Not of losing, not of breaking, not of needing someone. Later, after the movie ended and Credence drifted off to sleep in the pillow pile, Ian sat beside her on the floor and whispered, "You're still here. I told you I don't run easy. I didn't believe you at first." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's okay. You believe me now." He turned his face toward her hair, breathed in something that smelled like cocoa and soap and home. "Do you know how long it's been since this place felt like more than just a roof?" Sarah didn't move. "Not since she died," he said quietly. She looked up. "I don't talk about her often," he added. "Not because I don't remember, but because no one ever knew what to say." Sarah reached for his hand, didn't squeeze, just held it, steady. "You don't have to talk about her," she said. "But if you ever want to, I'll listen." And he did. Not that night, but eventually, in bits and pieces, the way grief tends to come out when someone finally gives it space. Weeks later, on a rainy afternoon, Sarah was helping Credence organize his books when he looked up and asked, "Are you staying forever?" She blinked. "What makes you ask that?" "You put your name on the snack shelf," he said. "People don't do that unless they stay." Sarah looked down at the little blue label, Sarah's Tea Plus Emergency Cookies. She smiled. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd like to." Credence didn't say anything. He just nodded once. And that was enough. That evening, when Ian returned from a meeting, Sarah greeted him with the smell of fresh cookies and the sight of his son sitting cross-legged on the counter reading aloud from a cookbook. "Tonight's dinner will involve flour and regret," she said. Ian smiled. "So we're doing this?" "We are." The kitchen was a mess. There was flour in Credence's hair and tomato sauce on Sarah's sock. But Ian had never felt more grounded in his life. Later, as Sarah stood at the sink washing dishes, sleeves rolled up, humming something off-key, Ian came up behind her. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, watching. Then, quietly, he said, "I've been thinking about labels." She turned. "Like, for jars. For us." "Oh," he paused. "I don't want to rush it, or trap it, but I also don't want to let it float around unnamed." Sarah tilted her head. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if we can call this something." She smiled. "What would you call it?" He stepped closer. "Something warm." She laughed. "That's incredibly vague and surprisingly perfect." He kissed her. Not for the first time, but for the first time where it felt like it didn't have to be followed by any explanation. And across the room, Credence looked up from his book, took in the scene, and gave a small nod. "Finally," he said under his breath.